Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Marcus was watching Julia through the bathroom mirror while she brushed her teeth with unusual urgency. In the last 3 months, small details had started to catch his attention in a subtle but persistent way. Julia had always been an organized and predictable woman in her routines, but now there seemed to be a different energy in her movements, an anxiety that she tried to hide with forced smiles and superficial conversations about her job at the men's clothing store she had opened with her friend Madison. The 38-year-old radiologist couldn't exactly pinpoint what was changing, but he felt a growing distance between them, as if his 28-year-old wife was mentally somewhere else, even when physically present at home. The most obvious change was in their intimacy. Julia, who used to seek affection and physical closeness, now constantly found excuses to avoid intimate moments. When Marcus tried to hug her in bed, she claimed to be too tired from work at the store. When he suggested a romantic dinner, she said she was worried about the business finances. The rejections always came with logical explanations, but Marcus noticed something artificial about these justifications, as if Julia were reciting a rehearsed script to maintain emotional and physical distance from him. The spontaneity that had always characterized their relationship was gradually disappearing, replaced by a cold and calculated politeness that left Marcus confused and hurt. During meals at home, Julia talked obsessively about the store, mentioning specific customers with a frequency that began to bother Marcus. She told detailed stories about a customer named Carter, describing him as a successful and charming man who always gave compliments on her work and taste in men's fashion. Marcus noticed how Julia's eyes lit up when she spoke about the conversations she had with Carter, and how she seemed excited in a way she no longer showed when talking to her own husband. The difference in tone was subtle, but Marcus, who had known Julia for 4 years, could perceive the change in her voice and enthusiasm whenever Carter's name was mentioned during their conversations. The situation worsened when Julia started working later at the store, arriving home around 9 at night with explanations about inventory, organizing stock, and meetings with suppliers. Marcus respected her dedication to the business, especially since he had invested a considerable amount of his own money to help open the store, but he noticed something strange when Julia began taking showers immediately after arriving home, before even greeting him properly. She said she was sweaty and exhausted from work, but Marcus noticed that she seemed more energized than exhausted, as if she were trying to wash away something other than just the fatigue from the day's work. The emotional distancing intensified when Julia began avoiding conversations about the couple's future. Before, they talked about travel plans, the possibility of having children, and home renovations, but now Julia would deflect every time Marcus tried to bring up those topics. She claimed to be very focused on the growth of the store and said she wanted to wait until the business stabilized before thinking about other life projects. Marcus understood the logic behind the argument, but he sensed something deeper behind this resistance to discussing the future, as if Julia could no longer imagine building a long-term life with him. Marcus' suspicion grew definitively when he realized that Julia had changed her phone password. During the 2 years of marriage, they had always known each other's passwords, not out of distrust, but due to a natural sense of transparency between the couple. When Marcus tried using her phone to make a call because his battery was dead, Julia reacted defensively, saying she had changed the password for security reasons related to the store's financial data. The explanation was plausible, but her reaction was disproportionate, as if he had tried to access something extremely private and forbidden. On a Thursday in March, Marcus decided to surprise Julia by bringing her favorite dinner to the store. He called Madison, Julia's partner, to confirm whether they were working late, and Madison seemed confused when he mentioned that Julia had said she was at the store organizing the new stock. Madison explained that they had closed early that day and that Julia had left around 5 in the afternoon, saying she had some personal matters to attend to. Marcus felt a chill in his stomach when he realized Julia had lied about where she was, and for the first time since noticing the changes in her behavior, he allowed himself to consciously consider the word betrayal. The next day, Marcus observed Julia with renewed attention, looking for signs that would confirm or deny his growing suspicions. She woke up earlier than usual and spent a long time getting ready, choosing clothes with care that she hadn't shown in months when leaving only for work. Marcus noticed that she had done her nails, used a different perfume, and chosen lingerie he hadn't seen in a long time. When he asked if there was something special happening at the store, Julia said they had an important meeting with a supplier and that she wanted to make a good professional impression. The explanation was logical, but Marcus noticed a nervousness in her voice that didn't match the naturalness she should feel during a routine business meeting. Over the weekend, Marcus proposed going to the restaurant where they had their first date, hoping to rekindle the connection he felt was slipping away. Julia agreed, but throughout the night, she seemed distant and preoccupied, discreetly checking her phone several times and replying to messages with an urgency she tried to hide. When Marcus commented on her lack of attention, Julia apologized and said she was receiving important messages about the store, but he noticed that she smiled differently while reading some of the messages, a private and secretive smile that had nothing to do with professional matters. The night that should have been romantic and reconnecting ended with both of them in silence in the car, each lost in their own thoughts and insecurities. On the following Monday, Marcus made a decision he never imagined would be necessary in his marriage. He took a day off from the hospital where he worked as a radiologist and decided to discreetly investigate Julia's activities. He parked in a location with a view of her store and observed its routine all morning. Around 11 o'clock, he saw a tall and well-dressed man entering the store and greeting Julia with a hug that lasted longer than appropriate between a customer and a salesperson. Marcus felt a mix of anger and disappointment as he watched how Julia smiled at the man, with a naturalness and joy she hadn't shown in months at home. Marcus continued observing and saw that the man stayed in the store for almost 2 hours, much longer than necessary for any clothing purchase. During this time, Marcus noticed that Madison left the store, leaving Julia and the man alone. Their body language was unmistakably intimate, with subtle touches on the arms, close conversations, and glances that clearly exceeded the boundaries of a business relationship. Marcus felt his heart racing and his hands trembling as he held the steering wheel, realizing that his worst suspicions were being confirmed right before his eyes in a painfully clear way. When the man finally left the store, Marcus followed him discreetly to a hotel downtown. He watched him enter the establishment and, after a few minutes of hesitation and internal conflict, Marcus decided he needed absolute certainty before confronting Julia. He waited outside the hotel, fighting against the voice in his head telling him to leave and pretend he hadn't seen anything. 40 minutes later, he saw Julia arriving at the hotel, looking nervously around before quickly entering through the main door. Marcus felt as if he had taken a punch to the stomach, and the entire emotional structure he had built over the 4 years of his relationship with Julia collapsed instantly. Marcus parked the car and entered the hotel, feeling his legs trembling and his heart beating so hard he was sure everyone in the lobby could hear it. He approached the reception and, pretending to be a client interested in staying overnight, asked about room availability for that night. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with gray hair tied in a bun and reading glasses hanging around her neck, politely replied that there were no available rooms without a prior reservation. Marcus then changed tactics and asked if a tall, dark-haired, well-dressed man in his mid-30s had stayed there, accompanied by a blonde woman of average height and approximately 28 years old. The receptionist looked at him suspiciously and firmly replied that she couldn't provide information about guests for privacy and safety reasons. Marcus thanked her and quickly left the hotel. Outside the hotel, Marcus called Julia, who answered with an out-of-breath and clearly irritated voice, claiming to be busy with suppliers and that she would call back later. But Marcus could hear background noises that didn't match a business meeting. He hung up without saying goodbye and stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, trying to process the reality that his marriage had ended, even though Julia still didn't know he had discovered her infidelity. The feeling of betrayal was physical, like something was being torn out of his chest, and Marcus needed to lean against the building wall to keep from falling. He went back home and, for the first time since suspecting Julia's infidelity, let all the anger and disappointment come to the surface. He could no longer pretend normalcy or give the benefit of the doubt to behaviors that now made complete sense. He decided to confront Julia that same night, but not as a desperate husband begging for explanations, but as a man who had discovered the truth and was ready to make definitive decisions about the future. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon organizing important documents, contacting a lawyer specializing in divorce, and emotionally preparing for the conversation that would change both of their lives forever. When Julia arrived home around 8 at night, Marcus was sitting in the living room with a calm expression she couldn't interpret. Julia tried to act normally, talking about her day at the store and asking about his work at the hospital, but Marcus interrupted her firmly and directly. He said they needed to talk and asked her to sit down. Julia sensed the seriousness in his tone and tried to ask what was happening, but Marcus asked her to simply listen to what he had to say, explaining that the moment of truth had arrived between them. Marcus looked directly into Julia's eyes and said he knew about the lover, the hotel, the lies, and the infidelity that had been going on for months. Julia initially denied it, saying Marcus was imagining things and that Carter was just an important customer at the store, but Marcus interrupted her again, detailing everything he had observed and discovered that day. He mentioned the excessive time Carter spent at the store, their trip to the hotel, the suspicious phone call she answered, and all the behaviors that now made perfect sense within the context of marital infidelity. Confronted with irrefutable evidence, Julia broke down and confessed the affair, but in a way that devastated Marcus even more deeply than he had expected. Instead of showing remorse or asking for forgiveness, Julia said she had found in Carter something she had never had with Marcus, passion and physical satisfaction that their marriage had never provided. She said she had tried to be a good wife, but always felt something was missing in the relationship, and that Carter had awakened feelings she didn't even know existed. The confession was filled with cruel comparisons that Marcus would never forget, as Julia explained in detail how Carter made her feel desired and complete in a way Marcus had never managed to do. Marcus felt like he was being stabbed repeatedly with every word Julia spoke. He had prepared himself to hear about the infidelity, but not to be humiliated and diminished in such a cruel and unnecessary way. Julia seemed to be releasing months of repressed frustration, saying she had always faked satisfaction in bed, always had doubts about the sexual compatibility of the couple, but had chosen to ignore those signs because Marcus was a good man in every other aspect. Her words echoed in Marcus' mind like physical blows, destroying not only the present but also all the memories he had of intimate moments he had believed were genuine and mutually satisfying. Marcus' reaction was immediate and final. He stood up from the couch, looked at Julia with a mix of disappointment and determination, and said the marriage had ended at that exact moment. He told her she had until the end of the weekend to take her things out of the house, that he would file for divorce on the following Monday, and that he did not want any further conversation or attempt at reconciliation. Julia tried to suggest couples therapy, saying she was confused and maybe could end things with Carter, but Marcus interrupted her, saying there was nothing more to discuss between them, as she had clearly shown she had never truly loved him and that their marriage had been a lie from the beginning. Marcus left the house that same night and went to a hotel, leaving Julia alone with the consequences of her choices and words. He called his lawyer that night, explained the situation, and asked to have the divorce papers prepared as quickly as possible. Marcus also contacted the accountant who handled his finances and requested detailed information about the investment he had made in Julia's store, wanting to recover every cent he had invested in her business. The coldness and determination with which Marcus acted surprised even himself, but the humiliation he had suffered during Julia's confession had solidified his decision to cut all ties with her quickly and definitively. Over the weekend, Marcus returned to the house only to pick up some clothes and important documents, avoiding any contact with Julia. She tried to talk to him, apologized for the cruel words she had used during the confession, and said she was sorry for betraying and being so harsh with him, but Marcus showed no emotional reaction to her attempts at closeness. He said only that the lawyers would communicate from then on and that he expected her to honor the agreement to leave the house by Sunday night. Julia cried and tried to hug him, but Marcus moved away firmly, saying she had made her choice when she decided to cheat and when she chose to humiliate him during the confession of the betrayal. The divorce process was quick and efficient, exactly as Marcus had planned. He managed to recover all the money he had invested in Julia's store, as he had documentation proving the investment had been made with exclusively his resources before the marriage, and Julia had signed a document acknowledging the loan when the business was opened. Julia tried to contest the recovery of the money, but her lawyer explained there was no legal basis to prevent Marcus from reclaiming the investment, especially considering she had confessed to adultery and the divorce was being processed for just cause. Marcus blocked Julia on all social media platforms, changed his cell number, and took all necessary measures to avoid any contact with her after the divorce was finalized. Through mutual acquaintances, he learned that Julia had tried to maintain the relationship with Carter, but he had lost interest in her once he discovered she was divorced and available for a serious relationship. Apparently, Carter was only interested in the excitement of an extramarital affair and had no intention of committing to Julia, leaving her alone and regretting the choices she had made. Months later, Marcus began rebuilding his emotional and social life, focusing on his work and hobbies he had neglected during the marriage. He enrolled in a photography course, returned to playing tennis with friends from the hospital, and gradually started going out socially again. Marcus realized that his marriage to Julia had been more restrictive than he had perceived at the time, and now he felt free to explore interests and relationships more aligned with his personality and values. Julia's betrayal, although devastating at the time, turned out to be an opportunity for liberation from a relationship that had never fully worked for either of them. Julia, on the other hand, faced the consequences of her choices in a lonely and painful way. The store she had opened with Madison continued operating, but without Marcus's investment, she faced significant financial difficulties and had to accept an investor partner who reduced her share of the business profits. Her relationship with Carter ended humiliatingly, as he simply stopped responding to her messages after a few weeks of the divorce being finalized. Julia discovered she had traded a stable marriage and a dedicated husband for a few months of physical passion with a man who had never had serious intentions with her. Julia's regret was deep and enduring, but Marcus never learned about her remorse, as he had decided to maintain no contact with her. She wrote letters asking for forgiveness and explaining that she had realized the value of what they had built together, but Marcus never read these letters, as his lawyer intercepted and filed them without showing him. Marcus had been clear about his desire to move forward without looking back, and his legal team respected that decision, protecting him from Julia's attempts to re-establish communication between them. The story of Marcus and Julia became an example among their mutual friends and family of how impulsive decisions and a lack of honest communication can destroy relationships that could have been saved through counseling and sincere dialogue. Marcus represented the dignity of a man who, upon discovering the betrayal, acted firmly and decisively to protect his self-esteem and future, while Julia embodied the devastating consequences of choosing immediate gratification over assumed commitments and family values. The outcome of their separate lives served as a reminder that some choices are irreversible, and that regret, no matter how sincere, is not always enough to repair damage caused by betrayal and humiliation in love relationships. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.